field of second language acquisition and is currently using questionnaires to investigate how language learners develop habits that support their language studies. And the use of questionnaires is precisely the topic of today's webinar. The webinar draws on survey instruments in second language acquisition and on the work of Zoltan Dornier and colleagues to offer a brief introduction to systematically designing and administering questionnaires and handling the resulting data. We're all very happy to have you today, Denitza. And Denny, right? And the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I mean, I go by both. Denny is probably the one that sounds a bit less like my parents are angry with me. That's when Denitza kind of comes out. Hello, everyone. Very, very nice to imagine that you're somewhere very nice and warm like Chile and not in the UK today on the 15th of March. It's not spring yet. And to talk a little bit about questionnaires, which is what Bernardo and Benjamin and Thomas have asked me to talk about today. There is a lot to know about questionnaires and surveys. I'm sure you know some already, or some of you will know something about questionnaires, or perhaps a lot about questionnaires, and other people won't know a lot at all. So I'm here trying to just introduce questionnaires and hopefully kind of get you interested in doing your own surveys and your own questionnaires and finding out more through some of the sources that I'll provide at the end of the talk as well. So if that sounds okay, I'll jump straight in. Today is, just to warn you, today is not a talk, it's not just a lecture. I'll be asking you questions, I'll be expecting some participation, and hopefully we'll have a bit of time at the end for some practical work as well. But let me just show you what we're up to today. So today, I really want us to start with talking about when do we actually use questionnaires in second language or L2 research. I'll be using L2 as shorthand for second language. And by that, I mean I'm going to ask you, how do you want to use questionnaires? Maybe how might you use them? Maybe how you have used them in the past. And I might use synonyms for questionnaire, probably the most prominent one being survey. But you might actually find words like battery and test, poll, all of those words to refer to a quantitative instrument like a questionnaire. So then we're going to talk a little bit about, or think about, steps of designing a questionnaire. Now, one of the points that I was making in my abstract is that these days it's actually quite easy to create a survey, or it seems quite easy to create a survey, but actually doing one systematically for the purpose of research in a disciplined way is a lot less easy than just opening Google Forms and creating some questions. And that's the questions, really. That's the thing that I really want to focus on today. Where do I find questions? How do I think of questions to put in my questionnaire regarding second language acquisition or second language research? And within that, we're going to focus specifically on the main questionnaire items. So the items or the questions that answer our research questions. And hopefully we'll have a bit of time to maybe have a go at building your own, if you haven't already, using either Google Forms or Microsoft Forms. So what we're not doing today is I'm not going to go into the analysis of data. If we have time, we will have a look at what the data looks like, or the output from, for example, Microsoft Forms or Google Forms looks like when the data has actually come in. But we're not going to go into the statistical analysis. There are many more. We don't have enough time today, but also there are many very good sources on doing that. And I also don't want to scare you too much at the moment. But statistics is not scary. It just has to be taught well. But we're not going to go into that today. Okay, so if that sounds okay, what I would really like to do is, oh, there you go. That's Nottingham University in the sunshine. So not today, but that's the building where all the magic happens for the Applied Linguistics Department at University of Nottingham. But I mean, how is this pace, just in terms of kind of, am I going too fast? Am I speaking too fast? That's another thing that usually happens.
It's all good. It's all good.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. I'll try and slow down. Okay, guys. So like I said, I will kind of really like a little bit of participation or attendant participation. So we might actually use breakout rooms in a moment, in a few minutes, not quite yet. But I'll definitely get you to think about stuff in the meantime. So before we actually begin, I really want to ask you, I'd love your suggestions in the chat, please. I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes. If you are thinking about using a questionnaire or a survey, what are you thinking about using your survey for? To do what? Are you perhaps writing a piece of coursework or a dissertation if you're a student? If you're a teacher, are you thinking perhaps using surveys for a particular reason with your students? If you're a researcher, what have you used questionnaires for or surveys for? So I'd just love to get your ideas and your kind of interest, your existing kind of thoughts about questionnaires and how you might use them and what for. I'm just trying to see if I can see the chat so I can. There we are, chat. Oh, we have 25. That's great. So just a couple of minutes. It's 15:11 now. Or not 15:11, 12:11 probably. So any suggestions in the chat, please? And if this doesn't work, then the next question, we're going to definitely put you in there. Oh, excellent. Okay. Feedback from students. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, if we're teachers, we might use feedback forms, feedback questionnaires and surveys, potentially at the beginning, at the end of term, or as Hector has just said, we might actually use them to see how they're engaging with activities in class. So perhaps a kind of experience sampling or event sampling, or get just immediate feedback in the moment. Recognize previous information about a topic. Okay, yeah. So I think, Anna, I think maybe you mean, correct me if I'm wrong, checking understanding, checking knowledge about something, some information that has already been delivered, perhaps in a lecture. Very good. Yeah, Bernardo. So that's the beginning of term, students' expectations, and then at the end of term, feedback. Were those expectations met? Yep, check understanding of content, information, tasks given. So, so that's a really interesting point. So check understanding of content, information, or tasks. And I think Anna as well earlier on mentioned recognizing previous information about a topic. It is possible that we might use questionnaires for this, although in these two suggestions, they sound a little bit like a kind of a revision test or kind of knowledge check, which definitely we might use to check the English level. Again, that's a little bit more of a test rather than a questionnaire or a survey. So a questionnaire or a survey is more of a psychometric test. And I'll kind of go into why we might use them in a moment. So, okay, well, I think that's plenty of really great suggestions so far. But this is the kind of the distinction that I'd like you to keep in mind. Surveys are not tests. They're not there to check knowledge in class, for example. We have kind of special ways of doing that. Now let's have a look. So when do we actually use questionnaires? So we are talking very much in the context of research. So what I'm really kind of trying to get at here is that I might have a research question and a hypothesis based on that research question that I might want to test. And surveys allow us to do this in a very economical way, quite quickly. And the sort of data. Okay, so I've just seen Lydia to find out about students' interests and how I can adapt my material to be more motivating. Absolutely. So that's a sort of information that I can actually use to help me, which is not a test, but I'm still using it in the context of the language classroom. So I've given some examples here. So I might collect some factual information. So for example, kind of the gender, age, native languages of research participants, or to get to know my students better. Behavioral information. So perhaps I'm really particularly interested in the learning habits of students. Attitudinal is really where Nebia's example would come in. So what are the kind of preferences? What things do I like? What is my attitude towards a particular activity, so that I can then try to adapt my materials to that? But also more broadly in my area, which is psychology of language learning, attitudes to the L2 culture, L2 meaning the foreign language that I'm studying, Spanish, English, German. My beliefs in my own learning ability. So how confident is my class that they're actually going to succeed? And if they're not confident, what can I do to actually kind of bring up their confidence, which is going to kind of help them to actually achieve the success that I would really love to have them achieve? So think about these types of data, and some of the examples that were mentioned in the chat definitely fit in here. We use questionnaires and surveys primarily when we're interested in quantitative data. So kind of surveys allow us to send out a form. I'm talking essentially about an online survey, and get back loads of data that I can kind of summarize and try kind of to generalize across, for example, my classroom, or a cohort of language learners, teachers, students, and so on. So with questionnaires and surveys, more often than not, we're not really interested in kind of really understanding the detail, the nitty-gritty of a particular issue. I might just get students to find, to kind of rate their preference for a certain activity and see how many prefer it and how many don't, but I'm not going to understand why they don't prefer it necessarily. I might ask questions like that in a questionnaire format, but certainly if I want really a lot of in-depth information, then I might try to go down the route of more qualitative kind of interview focus group instruments. Okay, are there any questions so far? I've got the chat open and I can't see anything on there, but please unmute yourself at any point. This isn't a formal lecture like I mentioned before. Okay, so steps of designing a questionnaire. I just want to kind of get you to think a little bit about what does designing a questionnaire involve. So again, I'm going to give you just a couple of minutes to think. Please don't worry, there are no right or wrong answers. If there is an answer that isn't quite what I was looking for, that's great as well. I think there are many teachers in this room, so we know how any answer is a learning opportunity. But what do you think? What does designing a questionnaire involve? What I'm trying to get at here is that, like I said at the beginning, it can be very easy to open up Google Forms or Microsoft Forms and tap out a few questions and send out the questionnaire. It's a little bit kind of trickier or a little bit more involved or complicated when we're talking about more kind of scientific, disciplined way of designing surveys. So any ideas? Our goal information, Anna, could you expand on that? I think I know what you mean, and that's definitely one thing that we definitely want to include, but identify our goal information. What do you mean by that? You have a bit of time to expand. Any other suggestions? What does designing a questionnaire involve? Think about your own experience. How did you do it? Or if you haven't done it, how do you imagine it might work? Okay, we might not get many more. Okay, plan and select the questions. Very good. Okay, make sure items are clear. addressing the information we want to get. Okay, yeah, deciding the objective. I think that's what kind of identifying our goal related to as well. Just one more minute to see if anybody else wants to contribute. So, okay, I will move on because just to try and leave a bit more time for actual survey construction if we want to, but identify the target group, very good. Okay, all of those things, all of the above, absolutely. So this is kind of the little diagram that I created to try to give an overview of that process. So absolutely, what is your research question? What are you trying to find out? And I keep talking about research questions, which betrays my background currently, or my preoccupation currently with academic research. But this is very much still the question, the same in classroom research. What is your research question and what is your target audience? Who is the survey aimed at and what are you trying to actually find out? I'm pointing this out because far too often, especially higher education students who are trying to, of which I am one, trying to kind of build the first survey, we can sometimes lose sight of what actually are we trying to do? What is the end goal? So we identify our target audience and our question, and that's when we start to draft questions. So that's what Elizabeth was saying. So planning, selecting the questions, and not only the questions. So we have our instructions. I'll have to draft some instructions in order to make sure that the questions are well understood. I will draft the question items themselves, and also I have to draft the response options. So those are kind of three things that I'm thinking of in terms of drafting, in terms of writing. And we're going to go back and talk about how we select our questions in a moment. Oops, apologies for my animation. So our next step, our third step, is really looking at what we've drafted, really trying to think critically and evaluate what we've done, and then revise it. So our fourth step is going back to our instructions, to our questions and response options, and kind of redrafting it. And then the fifth and sort of the last step that you can see on the screen right now, I really need to check that it works. And for that to happen, I need to send it to a small group of people. We have 4 lined up in front of the computer there, but piloting, so sending out, testing that this survey works, that it either there is no confusion or whether there are any kind of misunderstandings of questions, whether there are any questions that don't work, any technical glitches, anything like that. Would be the next step. And piloting might seem like a luxury. Elizabeth, very good, yeah, proofreading as well. All of this is really important to, beyond just deciding kind of what the questions will be. Piloting might seem like a bit of a luxury in the classroom, and I take that point completely. It is pretty much necessary in research. So if you are looking to do kind of discipline systematic surveys, then build in some time to pilot your survey with a group of people who are very similar to the target audience, and revise again. So you might be seeing the pattern here. It's draft, revise, revise, already 3 times of looking at our questions, proofreading, taking on board feedback from the pilot. And only then really are we ready to send to a larger group of people, our target audience. So just really, if you go away with nothing else, doing a scholarly survey systematically doing an academic survey would definitely require some time. So build that time in. Things look differently in the classroom, but I feel that the approach should be very much similar, deciding on what the research question is, who is the class, who are the people in my class, and what exactly am I trying to find out. And so let's have a look. So the next kind of task that I'd like us to work with, and Benjamin, if that's okay, it would be great to use breakout rooms for this. And I can presumably share something in the chat. I can share some files, I believe. Okay, it looks like I can't share any files because I'm not admin. Is it possible to make me admin at all?
Let's try now.
No, not yet. Oh, that's okay. I will. What I'll do is I'll email you a couple of files, and then perhaps you can attach them. Apologies. I took it for granted that I'd be able to do that. Give me a second. Okay. All right. So what I'm going to do, and what I'm doing right now is sending Benjamin examples of 2 surveys. And what I'd like you to do in your groups is have a really good look at those surveys and tell me all of the bits of content that has gone into them. Let me just, too many screens. Okay, now is the time for a short break, I think, if anyone wants to go and get some water or some coffee. I'm just going to stop sharing for a moment. Okay, Benjamin, so I've just sent you two files, a PDF and Word, if you don't mind dropping them into the chat. There's no subject. Oh, I'll put a subject in. Okay. Hopefully that we've got that. Okay. So what I'll do is, so when you open the questionnaires, you will see different types of questions. I'd really like you to really pay attention to the different types of questions that are out there. What I'll do is, oh, I can admit Yolanda. Okay, Benjamin, do you have the email?
Yes, I'm checking the email.
Okay. So when you open the handouts, when you open the 2 surveys, just pay attention to every single bit of content that's in them, not just the questions, also the questions, of course, but I'd like you to really think about everything that goes at the start of the survey, at the end, in the middle, and also what the questions look like. Do they look in a particular way? What do you notice about them? Is there anything unusual, anything different? So I'll give you about 5 minutes to look at those. And I think because we're a little bit delayed, we might just do that individually again. what I'll do is I'll open up one of them so that we have something to look at while we are uploading. Okay, I'll just share my screen. Okay, so on my screen now, you should be able to see a survey that starts with the word code at the top. Code meaning that's the code that the participant would be putting in to identify their individual entry. And then I'd just like you to take a look at this page. Hopefully we'll be able to upload the actual file in the chat, but if not, just want you to think really actually everything that goes before the questions themselves. You have a little paragraph that says, thank you for providing answers to the following questions. This is not a test. There are no right or wrong answers. Please be frank in your answers. This will impact the research outcomes. And then part 1, in the following section, I'd like you to answer some questions by simply giving marks from 1 to 6, and then each of the marks, each of the numbers are explained, not at all to 6 very much. And then you have quite a few questions. For example, do you like the music of Arabic-speaking countries? And then answers from 6 very much to 1 not at all. And so this is part 1 of the survey. Questions with a little bit of a blurb on top. So as soon as you identify part of the questionnaire that is not a question in particular, do drop a line in the chat to see if what you're able to advise. So Benjamin has actually posted a link in the chat. So if you don't mind opening that link, and then you'll find the 2 surveys, a Word document and a PDF. So I'll give you 5 minutes to have a look at both and come back to me and put any information, any detail that jumped out at you in the chat here. What did you notice? What sort of content has gone in? And I'll stop sharing. Thanks very much for that, Benjamin. Sorry, it didn't work for some reason.
Don't worry.
Okay, so just 5 minutes. Let's take until, we can take until about 22. Well, as soon as people start to have some ideas, jot them down, put them in the chat, and we can discuss them together. Here's our question again. So what do the questions look like? Anything that you notice about the questions? And then what any other content that is included? That's great, Christian. Absolutely. So very, very simple English. And okay. Yep. And then some questions are written in a way that makes them seem as if scenarios, making it hard for the participant to connect to their own experience or lack of it. Okay. So there are, on the one hand, I think, Christian, what you're saying, on the one hand, the author of the survey has tried to kind of simplify their English, make it more accessible, but on the other, there are certain use of language that makes the questions a little bit difficult to answer potentially, if the point is to try to get them to connect that to their own experience. Okay, yeah, so the questions are very specific, the instructions are clear. Instructions are really, really important in surveys. All the answers can be quantified, yes, so there aren't any qualitative answers. Open-ended questions, or questions that invite people to share, for example, a sentence or even a paragraph about their experience, are also possible in questionnaires and in surveys. It's just that it might be, if you're it's not just questions that are included in the survey, it's also instructions. But yes, as Bernardo says, it also includes statements, reassurance. You know, there are no right or wrong answers, and there are very different ways, or very different scales of in terms of the response options. So let's just take a quick look at one of them, which was the motivation questionnaire that I opened just now. Just to follow up on Bernardo's point, if my computer will allow me to do that. Okay, so hopefully you can see this. Please tell me if you don't. So what, so we call questions, for example, from 6 to 1, very much to not at all, a kind of Likert scale. I'll mention that later as well. Quite often mispronounced as Likert, but it's actually, I believe, a Dutch scientist called Rensis Likert. But any question scale like that, any response scale from 1 to 6, either just with numbers or sometimes also with words, very much to not at all. It could be also 1 to 5, 1 to 7, 1 to 12. Is known as a Likert scale. You have a very similar scale here in part 2, but not with numbers, without numbers. Absolutely true to not true at all. Again, a Likert scale, just a nomial one. And then at the very end, we have a semantic, what's called a semantic differentiation scale. So you will have, if you like, a scale with no indication of what the second position means, or the third or the fourth, but you have 2 opposite statements or 2 opposite descriptions: efficient, inefficient, cheerful, cheerless, and so on, at both sides of the survey. So absolutely right, Bernardo. And in between, for that reason, especially if we're using very different types of question, or very different types of recording people's responses, like this one, a semantic differentiation scale versus a Likert scale, it's really important to have instructions, not just at the beginning of the survey, as we saw, but also instructions for each individual task, and how to answer them. So the purpose of this part is to do X, Y, and Z. There's an adjective, and put X at the point which best matches your assessment. So, and again, reassurance always, there's no right or wrong answers. Use your immediate impression. I'll only use your answers for research. I'll never share your information. So anonymity, confidentiality, reassurance about the validity of your answer, and instructions about how to answer. All of these are super, super important in certainly in academic research. An interesting point in the chat, the only thing that is shocking is the large number of questions in the survey. That's a really, really good point, Anna. So this is probably, I'd have to have a look again at the source, which is in my references in case you're interested. This is very much likely to be a survey that was administered in a language class. So in this case, Arabic class, which would probably, the class itself would probably be at least 45, 50 minutes long. So there'll be plenty of time within that class to answer those questions. Long surveys are not necessarily bad surveys. It's a good idea to try to keep surveys to, let's say, 15, 20-minute mark. Equally, if you do have access to your participants for a whole class, and it's really, really important for you to get all this data. Sometimes end of semester feedback sessions can have very long, the forms can be very long, which is the case at my university, for example. So you might decide that on the balance of kind of benefit, cost benefit, you would like to spend that time asking all this information. And especially if you're asking it only once or maximum twice at the beginning, at the end of the semester, or the beginning and the end of the course, then you might find that it's justifiable to do that. There are some surveys that are very long. However, you're absolutely right. You want to make sure that you make your questionnaires as short as possible. Okay, this is really great, guys. Thank you so much for all of those ideas. Benjamin, I'm just switching to my presentation. Just let me know if you can't see it. Yep. Okay, so just very quickly, we have a title. Actually, I don't think either of those. I think one of those surveys had a title. That's just something to really bear in mind. Have a title, but ideally a title that doesn't say or doesn't mean a huge amount to the reader, because we don't want to influence them in what they think and their answers later on in the questionnaire. Greet people, to say something friendly, and provide some general instructions like the survey that we just now saw. And those general instructions will include things like, why are we doing this? What is this research about? Or what is the survey about? And why is it important that we do the survey? The target audience, reassurances about right, wrong answers, and confidentiality and anonymity. Always say thank you in advance for people's time. And if you are doing a survey or questionnaire as part of your kind of coursework or thesis or dissertation that you're doing at university, you must make sure that you have approval from your ethics committee. It's not ethical to simply get a survey together, send it out, and collect people's data, in some cases quite personal data, including contact details and their names, without having approval from your institution. That's really important. And again, it takes time. Ethics approval takes time. So build that time in. Find out how long it takes at UDLA or whatever institution you're at. So we have some general instructions at the beginning. We also have some specific instructions, as we saw, for the different kinds of tasks, scales, especially if the scales are going to be different from one section of the survey to another. We need to explain to people how they're going to answer, unless it's completely obvious. Some demographic questions, meaning kind of age, race, gender, anything that helps you to kind of describe your participants, if you don't know them, if they're not people in your class, in particular. But just remember not to ask too many questions about individual people. If you ask me a lot of questions about me, a lot of personal details, why are you asking me that information? How are you going to use it? Always have a reason for asking information. And now the main questionnaire items, that's the kind of thing that I really want to focus on for the rest of our session today. It's what we found is that there were, and I think this is kind of what one of the comments referred to, is that there are so many questions, so many questions. And that is very often because in language research in particular, and in my area of psychology of language learning, so people's attitudes, behaviors, and so on, around language learning, very often we don't just ask one question about somebody's preference. We'll ask 5, which will all be about the same thing, but we don't just ask one, we ask 5 in order to avoid misinterpretation of one question. That's why we will ask more. So actually, Anna, some of the questions that you saw, they will perhaps 8, 9, or even 10 of them will be about one particular thing that I'm interested in. But I want to ask 10 questions, or I want to use a multi-item scale in order to find out for sure that this is a preference, or this is something that people like about Arabic. So multi-item scales is the thing to kind of take away if you haven't used them already and you want to do some academic research. And the multi-item scales can take different forms. The response can take different forms: a Likert, numerical rating, semantic differentials. You can have dichotomous questions, so agree, disagree, yes, no. And as I mentioned, you could have open-ended questions at the end, but keep those to a minimum. And always say thank you at the end. I will take any questions at this point. If there's anything that concerns you or that you're worried about, just unmute yourself or put the question in the chat. Okay, so multi-item scale. So it's this idea of the main questionnaire items that I really want to focus on now. Like, how do I choose? Where do I go to find those questions? So my best tip for you is steal other people's questions, steal the multi-scale items, or borrow them, and always provide a citation if you have done that. So I'll give you an example quickly. Let's say I have a question here. To what extent are my students inclined to put effort into their language studies? So I have a group of students, and I really want to know, are they actually quite kind of keen to put some effort into their studies, perhaps at the beginning of the semester, and then compare that to the end, potentially. So this is a question that has a pretty straightforward answer in many different articles in a lot of the language research literature out there. And many different people have devised scales or multi-item scales. An item is essentially one question. So an item is, apologies. If an English course was offered at university, I would like to take it. That's one item. And all of these items, you have 5 items here. Actually, the full scale, the full list of items, the full list includes 8 items. I didn't have space to include all of them here. So this is a particularly popular list or scale of questionnaire items to do with intended effort. So you might like some of them, you might not like them, you might not think they're relevant to effort, but the research has shown that they all seem to tap into, they all seem to refer to intended effort. So I think I'm doing my best. I would like to spend more time. I'd like to study English or German or Spanish, even if it's not required. And if I had access to English TV, I would watch it very often. So all of those different questions are all about intended effort, but they ask that question in 5 different ways. Okay, and this is really important particularly in academic research, but also in, like I said, in classroom research as well. Now, what if I am looking at a question for which there is no established scale, or for which it is difficult to find an obvious, well tried and tested scale? Okay, so in that case, I need to make my own. Make my own questionnaire items. So how would I go about doing that? The main way, or the first thing that I need to do, is once I've asked my question, for example, how would students in my class, for example, evaluate me, their language teacher, or how would students in X class evaluate their language teacher? Well, this was actually a real question that was researched many years ago, and there was no established scale for answering this question. No established list of questionnaire items that I could just take from an article and put in my study. So immediately I have to ask myself a follow-up question. So what does the literature say are the key areas of a student's evaluation of a language teacher? Okay, so there isn't an established scale about evaluating a language teacher. We're talking a really long time ago now. There will be more by this point. So what does the literature, by literature I mean, what do the textbooks, what do journal articles, what do theory articles about language learning say are areas of evaluation? Okay, and this is what Clément and colleagues found back in 1994. They found 4 areas that were key to a student's evaluation. Those were the teacher's competence, the teacher's relationship with the students, their kind of interaction, their rapport with their students in the classroom, the teacher's motivation. So the students were very interested to see that the teacher was motivated, and the teacher's personality and teaching style. I find this one quite difficult sometimes because I can't really do very much about my personality. It is what it is. And for all of these 4 elements, the writers chose several items. So 2 items for competence, 3 items for their rapport with students, 2 items for motivation, and 5 for personality and teaching style. And that's how Clément et al. Back in the early 90s came up with their own multi-item scale for researching students' evaluation of teachers. So this is probably the critical thing. If you ever use, whether or not you're using somebody else's scale or making your own, you must have some justification or some reason in theory. Hello? From the theory to use these particular items or to focus on these particular areas. Okay, so we don't really, just noticing the time, 15:53. So, and there's still people coming in.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Denny. I think
No,
that this
that's
is the
fine.
moment, and I think because of the time, we are going to have to maybe leave this for another opportunity.
Sure.
The option to build your own questionnaire. And I think that we want to thank Denny, who has provided us with a lot of relevant information about questionnaire design. And we are in depth, of course, with her and her help in all this process. And we will try to put together maybe a future meeting, which with the help of Denny, we can design our own questionnaire with time, right? And then he can give us some feedback on our process, right? But I think I speak on behalf of everybody here today in the audience when I say like thank you for all the information you have given us today, and how meaningful it is for us to have you with us virtually, and how much you have actually paid attention to the requirements that we have asked from you in terms of what we find could be useful for us. We want to, well, on behalf of Thomas Keller as well, the director of the Institute, I want to say thank you, Denny, and thank you to everybody in the audience who was here today sharing with us this very insightful meeting. All right, so thank you, everybody, and with this we say goodbye.
Thanks very much, everyone. Thanks for your and if there are any questions, and if you'd like any support with putting together a survey or anything like that in the meantime, then feel free to contact me via Bernardo and Benjamin. Benjamin, I also have some links for people where they can find questions or questionnaires that they can use.